The sun hung low over St. Peter's Basilica, casting golden light upon the courtyard where two titans of thought faced one another. The world watched in anticipation as Elon Musk and Pope Francis prepared to debate the very fabric of existence, logic versus faith, science versus spirituality. What began as a clash of ideologies would soon unravel into a deeply personal reckoning, revealing the unspoken fears and vulnerabilities that lay beneath their convictions. The courtyard of St. Peter's Basilica was alive with an electric tension. A sea of onlookers, journalists, scholars, believers, skeptics, had gathered in hushed anticipation. This was no ordinary debate. It was a confrontation between two of the world's most influential figures, two men standing on opposite sides of an ancient question. The air itself seemed to hold its breath as Elon Musk, the relentless visionary, and Pope Francis, the spiritual leader of billions, prepared to engage. Musk stood with his arms folded, his analytical gaze fixed on the elderly pontiff. He had debated the most brilliant minds of his time, but today was different. This wasn't about numbers or technological breakthroughs. This was about belief itself, about the unseen forces that drove humanity forward, or, as he saw it, held it back. Faith, to Musk, was an outdated relic, a comforting illusion in a world where reason had already charted a path to the stars. Pope Francis, in contrast, exuded an air of quiet confidence, a steady presence in the face of Musk's unyielding skepticism. He had spent his life guiding lost souls toward faith, but today he was not speaking to the devout. He was standing before a man who saw divinity as nothing more than a construct, one who had built rockets to escape the heavens rather than pray to them. But the Pope was not here to convert, nor was he here to condemn. He had lived long enough to know that faith could not be forced. It had to be discovered. The debate began as expected. Musk, sharp and relentless, dismantled the need for a divine presence in a world of data and discovery. He spoke of human ingenuity, of the power of reason to shape the universe, of science's ability to explain the mysteries that religion had once claimed dominion over. Faith, he argued, was nothing more than an outdated mechanism for control, a crutch for those afraid to face the vast, indifferent cosmos. The Pope listened without interruption, his hands clasped in front of him. He had heard these arguments before, but he did not respond with scripture or doctrine. Instead, he spoke of faith as something beyond proof, a presence that lived not in books or temples, but in the bonds between people, in acts of love and sacrifice. Faith, he said, was not the enemy of progress, but the very thing that made life meaningful. Musk smirked, but there was no malice in his expression, only curiosity. He pushed further, demanding evidence, something tangible that could withstand the scrutiny of logic. The Pope responded not with arguments, but with stories of people who had suffered unimaginable loss and yet found strength in something unseen, something that science could not quantify. The conversation grew more intense. The audience, initially captivated by the spectacle, now found themselves caught in the gravity of something greater than a mere intellectual battle. There was something deeply human in this exchange. Two men, one wielding reason, the other faith, neither willing to yield, yet both searching for something beyond mere victory. Musk, ever the pragmatist, shifted the discussion towards suffering. He spoke of the brutal indifference of the universe, of a world where millions perished without reason. If God existed, why would he allow such chaos? The Pope's expression darkened, not in anger but in sorrow. He did not have an easy answer, nor did he claim to, but he spoke of suffering not as proof of an absent God, but as a testament to humanity's capacity for resilience, for compassion, for love. The debate took an unexpected turn. Musk, usually composed, hesitated. Something in the Pope's words struck a nerve, something he had not expected. He had spent his life solving problems, controlling outcomes, designing futures. But he had never controlled suffering. He had never conquered grief. A silence hung between them. The debate was no longer about proving a point. It had become something else, a conversation about the very nature of existence, about what it meant to be human. The audience leaned forward, sensing the shift. Something profound was happening, and for the first time in the conversation, Elon Musk did not have an immediate answer. Musk's silence was brief but deafening. The crowd, once enthralled by the intellectual clash, now sensed the weight of something deeper, a hesitation, a crack in the armor of logic. The Pope had not won in any conventional sense, nor had he outmaneuvered Musk with rhetoric. Instead, he had exposed something raw, something that could not be argued away. Musk's eyes flickered with something just short of doubt. But it was not doubt in his own intelligence or reasoning. It was the kind of doubt that came when a mind, so accustomed to control, was confronted with something uncontrollable. He recovered quickly, straightening his posture, his expression once again unreadable. He refused to let sentimentality weaken his position. "So, you're saying suffering has meaning? That it's some divine test?" His voice was sharper now, cutting through the stillness like a scalpel. The audience stirred, sensing the shift in energy. This was no longer a philosophical discussion. It was a challenge, direct and personal. The Pope met his gaze, unshaken. He had spent decades in the presence of men who wielded power, and he had learned that true power was not in the force of one's words, but in their weight. "I am saying," the Pope said, his voice calm but firm, "that suffering is an undeniable part of life, and if life has meaning, then suffering must as well." Musk exhaled sharply, shaking his head. He had built an empire on the belief that problems had solutions, that suffering could be eradicated through innovation, through reason. Yet here was a man who claimed suffering itself was meaningful. It was infuriating, and yet somewhere deep. In his mind, the idea gnawed at him. The Pope pressed on, not with arguments, but with something more dangerous. Questions. If suffering was meaningless, then why did humanity go to such great lengths to ease it? Why did Musk, a man who spoke so passionately about building a better future, dedicate his life to solving problems that would long outlive him? Was it merely an instinct, or was there something else, something greater driving him? Musk frowned, crossing his arms. He was not used to being on the defensive. "People improve the world because that's what evolution designed us to do," he countered. "Cooperation, compassion, those are survival traits. They're not proof of anything divine." The Pope nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "Then why do we sacrifice for strangers? Why do we love people who can do nothing for us? Why do we feel loss so profoundly if all of this is just mechanics?" The words hit like a slow-moving avalanche, unsettling in their simplicity. Musk had never needed faith to explain human nature. He had always trusted the evidence, the calculations, the patterns, the algorithms. Love, suffering, meaning, these were mere neurological functions, weren't they? And yet, he had felt it. The crushing weight of loss when something irreplaceable was taken. The unspoken connection between minds working toward a singular, impossible goal. The awe of seeing a rocket break free from the atmosphere, not because it was profitable, but because it was something greater than the sum of its parts. For a moment, just a moment, he almost admitted something to himself. But he resisted. His frustration surged back, masking the unease. "You're making this sound poetic," he said, his tone sharper. "But in reality, meaning is whatever we decide it is. We assign value to things. The universe doesn't." The Pope's expression softened, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet certainty that was somehow more infuriating than any argument he could have made. "Then why do people search for it so desperately?" he asked. Musk had no answer for that. The crowd held its breath, watching two forces collide, one built on certainty, the other on something far less tangible, yet no less powerful. And then, the Pope did something unexpected. He turned his gaze away from Musk and toward the audience. His voice was steady, but there was something almost sorrowful in it. He spoke not as a man trying to win a debate, but as a man who had seen suffering firsthand, who had walked among the forgotten and the grieving. He spoke of the mothers who held their starving children, of the men who had lost everything and still prayed. He spoke of the unbreakable human spirit, of the way people found hope, even in the depths of despair. He did not call it proof of God. He simply called it real. Musk's jaw tightened. He had seen suffering too, but he had never lingered in it. He had moved forward as he always did. He had built, he had solved, he had fixed, but not everything could be fixed. Not grief, not loss. Not the void that remained when something truly irreplaceable was gone. Something flickered behind Musk's eyes, something nearly imperceptible. He had not come here to be shaken. He had come here to prove a point. And yet, for the first time, he felt like he wasn't just debating the Pope. He was debating himself. The air between them was thick with unspoken thoughts. The Pope had given no definitive proof of God, no undeniable argument for faith. And yet, somehow, he had managed to plant something in Musk's mind, an idea that refused to be ignored. Musk took a breath, steadying himself. He would not concede, but he also could not deny that something within him had shifted. The conversation was far from over, and for the first time Musk wasn't entirely sure where it was going. The silence between them felt heavier than words. The crowd, once brimming with anticipation for a battle of intellects, now sat gripped by something else, something deeper. This was no longer a performance, no longer a spectacle of logic clashing against faith. It had become a reckoning, and, in this reckoning, Elon Musk found himself in unfamiliar territory. He was used to debate, to confrontation. He had stood before governments, skeptics, and critics alike, always armed with the irrefutable weight of facts. He had always known exactly what to say, how to dismantle an argument with precision. But here, standing in the courtyard of St. Peter's Basilica, beneath the looming presence of an institution that had endured for millennia, he was confronted by something more elusive than mere ideology. Doubt. It wasn't the kind of doubt that shattered belief. It was the kind that gnawed at its edges, that whispered questions in the quiet spaces of his mind. The Pope had not out-reasoned him, had not presented a case that could be torn apart with logic alone. Instead, he had introduced something far more unsettling, the weight of lived experience, the unquantifiable force of human suffering, resilience, and love. Musk clenched his jaw, unwilling to let the moment linger any longer than necessary. He had always known how to move forward, how to press on, how to build the next thing. And yet, for the first time, he hesitated, not because he lacked an answer, but because he was beginning to realize that perhaps there were questions even he had not fully considered. He exhaled sharply, breaking the silence. "You speak about meaning as if it's absolute," he said, his voice regaining its edge, "as if love, sacrifice, and suffering have some inherent cosmic significance. But what if they don't? What if we're simply creatures desperate to find purpose in the chaos?" The Pope did not flinch at the challenge. Instead, he studied Musk with the kind of patience that could only come from a man who had spent his life listening. "And what if we are?" the Pope responded gently. "What if meaning is something we create? Would that make it any less real?" Musk frowned. This was dangerous territory. He had spent his life arguing that meaning was self-made, that humanity's drive to explore, to innovate, to survive was not dictated by some divine hand, but by the relentless forces of nature. Yet hearing the Pope phrase it this way, posing it not as an argument, but as a question, unsettled him in a way he had not anticipated. For a moment his mind flickered back to his own journey. He had risked everything, pushed beyond the limits of what anyone believed possible. He had stood at the precipice of space, not because he had to, but because something within him demanded it. He had built, not merely for the sake of building, but because there was something profoundly human about reaching for the impossible. But was that not faith, in its own way? He shook off the thought, unwilling to let it take root. Meaning should be based on reality, he countered, not on something intangible, not on wishful thinking. The Pope inclined his head slightly. Reality, he echoed. Tell me, Mr. Musk, what is reality? The question was simple, too simple, and yet it carried with it an unsettling weight. Musk narrowed his eyes. Reality is what we can observe, what we can measure, what we can understand through science. The Pope nodded, but his expression was unreadable. Then, tell me, can you measure hope? Can you quantify love? Can you chart the depth of human longing? Musk exhaled, irritated by the shift in tone. That's just neuroscience. Emotions are chemical reactions, patterns in the brain. They can be studied, mapped, even replicated. The Pope smiled, but there was no condescension in it, only something like quiet amusement. Perhaps. But tell me, does understanding how a star is formed make it any less wondrous? Does knowing the mechanics of the human heart make love any less profound? Musk opened his mouth to respond, but something in the Pope's words struck him in a way he had not expected. It was a familiar sensation, the same feeling he had when staring into the vastness of space, when standing before the launch of a rocket, knowing that, for all his knowledge, there were still forces at play beyond his control. A memory surfaced, unbidden, his mother's voice reading to him when he was a child, telling him stories of distant worlds, of explorers who dared to dream beyond what was known. He had spent his entire life chasing that dream, building toward the future, and yet even now he could not explain why it mattered so much. The Pope's voice cut through his thoughts. "You have spent your life searching," he said, his tone almost reverent. "You have built bridges to the stars, pushed humanity further than it has ever gone. But tell me, for all your knowledge, all your discoveries, have you ever felt something greater than yourself?" The words hung in the air, daring Musk to confront something he had never allowed himself to before. Because the truth was, he had. He had felt it in the moments when everything aligned, the brief, fleeting seconds before a launch, when the air crackled with anticipation, when he stood on the edge of the impossible and knew that somehow it was about to happen. He had felt it in the quiet moments, too, in the way his children looked at him, in the rare but undeniable sense of connection with the people who shared his vision. But he did not know what to call it, and that, more than anything, was what unsettled him. The Pope did not press further. He simply let the silence linger, knowing that sometimes the most powerful realizations did not come from being told what to believe, but from being forced to ask the right questions. The audience was silent, waiting for Musk to respond, but for the second time that day, he did not have an immediate answer, and deep down, that terrified him. Terror was not a feeling Elon Musk was accustomed to. He had defied it too many times before, standing on the precipice of risk, pouring his life into ventures that could have shattered everything he had built. He had faced the crushing weight of failure and walked through it unfazed, driven by an unshakable belief in the power of human ingenuity. But this was different. This was not the kind of fear that came with losing money or reputation. It was something deeper, something more insidious. It was the kind of fear that crept in when a man began to question the very foundation of his certainty. He was on dangerous ground now, and he knew it. A part of him wanted to push back harder, to reassert control over the conversation, to drive the Pope into a corner with logic and force him to yield. But another part, one that he barely recognized, was hesitant. It was not because he was losing the argument. No, he could still dismantle every claim, still demand evidence, still argue that belief in something greater was a vestige of an outdated world. And yet, the Pope was not arguing in the way others had. He was not trying to prove the existence of God with Scripture or doctrine. He was simply speaking from a place of experience, from the undeniable reality of the human condition. And somehow, that was more unsettling than any theological debate Musk had ever encountered. The crowd remained silent, waiting for him to respond. The weight of their expectation pressed on him, and he forced himself to meet the Pope's gaze. The old man was watching him with quiet patience, as if he had seen the struggle before, as if he had seen countless people stand on this very precipice, torn between the need for control and the pull of something beyond reason. Musk finally spoke, his voice measured but taut. "You talk about something greater, but what if that feeling, whatever it is just another function of the brain? What if the sense of awe, of connection, of purpose is just a byproduct of evolution? An illusion designed to keep us moving forward?" The Pope considered this for a long moment before responding. And if it is? The question caught Musk off guard. He had expected resistance, expected a passionate defense of divine intervention. Instead, the Pope was inviting him to go further, to follow his own logic to its natural conclusion. Musk frowned. "Then it means we've been fooling ourselves. That every religion, every belief system, every moment of faith is just neurons firing in response to centuries of conditioning, that we assign meaning to things because we're too afraid to accept the alternative." The Pope nodded as if he had heard this argument many times before. And yet, even knowing that, people still search for meaning. They still sacrifice, still love, still believe. If it is an illusion, then tell me, Mr. Musk. Why does it feel more real than anything else? Musk opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. He had spent his life chasing something just out of reach. He had believed in the impossible, had thrown himself into endeavors that defied the limits of human capability. He had risked everything to push the species forward, not because it was profitable, not because it was easy, but because something deep inside him told him it mattered. But why? If meaning was just a construct, if faith was just an evolutionary mechanism, then why did he care? Why did he push so hard? Why did he feel that indescribable pull every time he stared into the vastness of space, every time he watched humanity take another step toward the unknown? His pulse quickened. He had spent his life arguing that meaning was self-made, that there was no divine plan, no grand design. And yet standing here, facing the weight of these questions, he felt something he could not explain. A memory surfaced, one he had not thought of in years. It was the night before the first Falcon 1 launch. He had been standing alone on the launch pad, staring up at the rocket that held everything, his dreams, his failures, his future. He had been utterly alone, no cameras, no team, just him and the cold expanse of the sky. And in that moment, for reasons he could not define, he had whispered something to himself. A plea, a hope, a prayer, though he had never called it that. Please let this work, not to God, not to the universe, just out into the void. And now, standing before the Pope, he was forced to confront something he had buried long ago. Had it really been just desperation, or had it been something more? The Pope watched him carefully, as if sensing the turmoil beneath the surface. He did not press further, did not demand an answer. Instead, he let the silence stretch, allowing Musk to wrestle with the questions. On his own, the crowd, sensing the shift, held their breath. Finally, Musk exhaled, shaking his head. "You're asking me to accept something without proof," he said, though his voice lacked the sharp certainty it had carried earlier. The Pope smiled, but it was not a victorious smile. It was something else, something almost sad. "No," he said softly, "I am asking you to listen to what you already know." The words hit like a hammer to the chest. Musk wanted to dismiss them, to laugh them off, to reclaim the control that was slipping from his grasp. But deep down, in the quietest parts of himself, he knew the truth. He had spent his life looking for answers in the stars. But maybe, just maybe, the most important questions had been with him all along. The tension in the courtyard was thick, the air electric, with the weight of what had just been said. The debate was not over, but something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, Elon Musk was not simply challenging faith. He was considering it. The thought alone was dangerous. Elon Musk had spent a lifetime trusting in what could be tested, in what could be measured. And yet, standing here in the courtyard of St. Peter's Basilica, he found himself on the precipice of a question he had never truly allowed himself to ask. Could it be possible? No. He shut the thought down almost immediately. He had seen too much, understood too much. The universe was not a place of divine intervention. It was a system, a set of equations running in endless loops. Reality did not bend to human hope. Rockets exploded when calculations were wrong. Space was not forgiving. And yet, for all the physics he understood, for all the numbers that governed the movement of planets, there remained something that no formula had ever explained. The Pope had put it into words: love, connection, sacrifice. These things did not follow the laws of efficiency. They did not emerge because they were the most rational course of action. If life was simply survival, why did humanity reach for more? The air between them was charged with something unspoken, something that neither man could quantify. The crowd could feel it too, the shift, the slow unraveling of what had once seemed so certain. Musk forced himself to reassert control. He had spent too long staring into the unknown. He needed an anchor, something tangible. His mind latched onto the problem of suffering, the single greatest argument against everything the Pope had suggested. If there is something greater, then why do people suffer? Musk asked, his voice harder now. Why do children die? Why do wars rage? Why do billions of people struggle for survival while others sit in comfort? If there is a God, why is the universe so cruel? It was a challenge, and a brutal one. The Pope's expression darkened, not in anger, but in sorrow. He had been waiting for this moment, for the inevitable confrontation with the question that had shattered faiths and broken spirits. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked out over the crowd, as if seeing each individual person, as if carrying the weight of their suffering with him. Then he spoke. Because free will exists, because love cannot be forced, because faith is not meant to be easy, Musk scoffed. That's a convenient excuse. If God is all-powerful, why not create a world without suffering? Why allow pain to exist at all? The Pope did not flinch. Would a world without suffering be a world worth living in? Musk narrowed his eyes. Yes, obviously. The Pope shook his head. No, it would not. A world without suffering is a world without choice. A world where there is no sacrifice, no need for courage, no room for love that costs something. Without suffering, there is no growth. Without loss, there is no meaning. You, of all people, should understand this. Musk felt a flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, or something far more complicated. And why should I understand? The Pope met his gaze steadily. Because you have suffered, and because it is that suffering that has made you who you are. Musk's jaw tightened. That doesn't justify it. No, the Pope agreed, his voice somber. It does not. And yet, here you stand. Because despite the suffering, you did not stop. Despite the loss, you kept building. Why? Musk said nothing. The Pope pressed on, his voice filled with quiet conviction. Because something inside you believes there is more, that there is a reason to keep going. You call it ambition, call it vision, call it whatever you like. But tell me, Mr. Musk, why do you care? Why does it matter what happens to humanity in the future? Why spend your life building rockets when you will never live to see where they truly take us? Why do you chase a future that you yourself may never witness? Musk clenched his fists. the frustration simmering beneath the surface. "Because it's worth it," he said, his voice lower now. "Because the things we build today will shape the future. Because humanity should not be limited to one planet, to one moment in time. Because our survival depends on pushing forward." The Yeti Pope nodded slowly. "And that, Mr. Musk, is faith." Musk froze. "No," he said immediately, shaking his head. "That's not faith. That's logic. That's planning for the long-term survival of our species." "And yet you do not know if it will succeed," the Pope countered. "You do not know if Mars will ever be a true home for humanity. You do not know if artificial intelligence will uplift us or destroy us. You do not know if the future you imagine will ever come to pass. And yet you act as if it will. You believe in it. You dedicate your life to it. That, Mr. Musk, is faith, not in God perhaps, but in something greater than yourself." The words struck something deep inside Musk, something he had never acknowledged before. He had never called it faith. He had always dismissed the word, associated it with blind obedience, with dogma, with things that could not be proven. And yet, had he not spent his life believing in something he could not see? He had poured everything, his money, his time, his very existence, into a future that did not yet exist. He had endured failure after failure, refusing to surrender, because something inside him refused to accept that the impossible was truly impossible. The Pope's voice softened. "You see, Mr. Musk, faith is not the enemy of reason. It is the foundation of every great endeavor. Faith is what drives us to keep going when reason tells us to stop. Faith is what allows us to build when we cannot see the outcome. It is not always about God. Sometimes it is simply about believing that something greater is possible." Musk inhaled deeply, his mind racing. The conversation had turned into something else entirely. It was no longer about proving or disproving the existence of God. It was about something far more personal. It was about the very thing that had defined his life. The crowd could feel it, the shift, the unraveling, the raw confrontation with something Musk had never been forced to name. The debate was not over, but for the first time, Musk was not sure if he wanted to win. The weight of the moment pressed on Elon Musk like the gravity he had spent his life trying to defy. He had come into this debate prepared to dismantle arguments, to outthink the Pope with facts and reason. But now, standing in the heart of Vatican City, surrounded by centuries of history and the eyes of a silent, captivated audience, he realized he had never truly prepared for this. He had never prepared for the possibility that he might not be entirely right. The Pope watched him, not with triumph, but with something else, something Musk couldn't quite place. It wasn't the look of a man who had won an argument, nor one who had converted an unbeliever. It was a look of recognition, as if he understood the war raging inside Musk because he had fought it himself. Musk clenched his fists, his mind racing, searching for solid ground. His entire life had been a testament to the power of logic, of persistence, of tangible results. He had built an empire on the idea that humanity could save itself, not through divine intervention, not through faith, but through sheer force of will. And yet, what was it that had driven him all these years? He had spoken of logic, but what logic made a man risk everything on the impossible? What logic made him believe in futures he would never live to see? What logic made him stand at the edge of space and feel something he could not explain? The Pope's words echoed in his mind. "That, Mr. Musk, is faith." The thought unsettled him. He turned away, letting his gaze drift across the gathered crowd. He saw journalists clinging to their cameras, waiting for the moment he would either concede or strike back. He saw skeptics and believers alike, their faces tight with anticipation. But then, beyond them, he saw something else, a mother holding her child, whispering something softly into their ear. An old man gripping the hand of his wife, as if she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. A young boy sitting on the shoulders of his father, eyes wide with wonder, staring at him as if he held the answers to the universe. For the first time, Musk realized they weren't just here to see a debate. They were here to understand. Not the existence of God, not the battle between science and faith, but something far more personal, what it meant to be human. Musk exhaled sharply. He had been fighting to prove a point. But maybe, just maybe, this was never about winning. The Pope broke the silence. "You have built a legacy, Mr. Musk," he said, "one that will endure. But tell me, will it be enough?" The question was a dagger, not because it was cruel, but because it was terrifyingly honest. Would it be enough? Musk had spent his life conquering one challenge after another, but to what end? He had wealth beyond measure, influence beyond imagination. He had built rockets that touched the heavens, had driven humanity toward the stars. But when all was said and done, when the engines fell silent and the steel rusted away, would it be enough? He thought of the sacrifices, the long nights, the failures, the relationships strained to the breaking point. He had always justified it, told himself it was necessary, that greatness demanded sacrifice. But had he ever stopped to ask why? Not why in the sense of progress, not why in the sense of ambition, but why it mattered at all. Musk lifted his gaze, meeting the Pope's eyes, and in that moment he felt something he had not expected. Understanding, not agreement, not submission, but understanding. They had fought their battle, each defending their view of the world with everything they had. But beneath it all, they were not enemies. They were simply men searching for the same answer. What is the meaning of it all? Musk took a slow breath, then spoke. "I don't know." His voice was quieter now, stripped of its sharp edges. "I don't know if there's something greater out there. I don't know if everything I've done is just atoms colliding in the void." The Pope nodded, as if he had expected this. "And yet you keep going." A silence stretched between them. Musk could feel the eyes of the world on him, waiting for his final word, waiting to see if he would stand his ground or bend. He thought of all the times he had stood on the edge of the unknown, of all the times he had pushed forward, despite every force telling him to stop, and he realized maybe faith wasn't about certainty. Maybe it was about stepping forward, even when you didn't have all the answers. His lips curved into something resembling a smile, tired, perhaps even amused at the irony of it all. "Yeah," he said, "I guess I do." The Pope returned the smile, not as a man who had won a debate, but as one who had simply shared a truth. The tension in the air broke, not with a single moment of victory or defeat, but with something far more powerful, a quiet understanding. The crowd erupted, but Musk barely heard them. His mind was elsewhere, still grappling with the weight of everything that had just transpired. He knew he had not converted. He had not abandoned logic, nor did he suddenly accept the idea of divine intervention. But something had changed as the sun began to dip over the Vatican, casting long, golden shadows across the courtyard. Musk turned to leave. He had come to win an argument. Instead, he had found a question he could not answer, and for the first time in his life, that felt like enough.